He never talked much about where he came from. Folks just figured Wade Callahan showed up from Texas with two good hands and a busted past, like most men heading west after the war. His face was hard to read, eyes always scanning, mouth set in a straight line, like he'd said all he had to say years ago and didn't care to say more. The other ranchers respected him, even if they didn't quite trust him. He kept to himself, paid in silver, and worked harder than anyone. No drinking, no gambling, no church either. Some whispered that he'd once worn a Confederate gray coat. Others claimed he'd done time back east for killing a man. Maybe both were true. Wade never corrected a soul. He bought a small patch of land outside Morrow Creek, a town just big enough to have two saloons and one preacher. Built the house with his own hands. No wife, no family, just a dog named Rufus who limped from some old injury, same as his master. Most evenings, Wade sat on his porch with a tin cup of coffee gone cold, eyes fixed on the dry hills stretching west, like he was watching for something. Or someone. The town was changing. The railroad was pushing in from the east, bringing strangers with slick hair and soft boots, men with paper money and grins too wide. The land was cheap if you knew who to bribe, and people were desperate or had gutted whole families. Drought didn't help either. Everyone needed something: water, seed, money, hope. Especially hope. That was how men like Fletcher Yates made a living. He wore clean clothes and called himself a trader, but everybody knew he dealt in whatever fetched the most. Horses, whiskey, girls. Sometimes folks got so poor, they sold what they didn't think they ever would. Even people. Fletcher had a slick tongue and a knife under his coat, and the law in Morrow Creek didn't stretch far past the saloon doors. The sheriff owed him money. The preacher looked the other way. Wade had crossed paths with him before. A few years back, Fletcher had tried buying a herd off him cheap, then spread word that Wade's stock was sick. Wade had caught him in the alley behind the general store and had broken his nose with one punch. After that, they stayed out of each other's way. But Fletcher didn't forget. Men like him never did. One morning, late spring, the word spread that Fletcher was holding a private auction out by the old tannery. No flyers, just whispers. Wade hadn't planned on going, but then he heard something that made his stomach turn. "They're bringing the girl with the sack over her head," someone muttered at the feed store. "Says she's a looker. Foreign maybe. Quiet as death." Wade stared down at the stack of seed corn in his hands. The words scratched at something deep inside. He tried to shake it off. It wasn't his business. But he'd seen something like that before. A girl sold in a mining camp. 13, maybe. She didn't last 2 weeks. He still heard her scream some nights. That was back when he still drank. That night, he didn't sleep. Rufus whined and paced by the door. Wade finally saddled his horse and rode out before first light. He kept to the trees behind the tannery. A lantern hung from a post, casting just enough light for him to make out the shapes of a few men. Fletcher, 2 of his boys, and a handful of others he didn't recognize. One had a banker's vest. Another wore a U.S. Army hat. The girl stood on a crate, hands tied. A dirty sack covered her face. She didn't move, not even when one of the men lifted the hem of her dress to show off her ankles. Wade's jaw clenched. Fletcher's voice cut through the still air. "She's quiet, healthy, and clean. No marks. Don't speak a word of English, far as I know. Starting at $50. The banker chuckled. "Don't need her to talk." Wade's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. Alan McKee, banker, elder at the church, husband to the mayor's cousin, a man who smiled wide in daylight and kept a second life behind closed doors. The kind who'd sign your mortgage with one hand and ruin your daughter with the other. The bidding started. Wade didn't think. He stepped out from the shadows. 100. The men turned. Fletcher froze. "You got some nerve showing up here." "I'll take her," Wade said. "Cash." Fletcher eyed him. "This ain't for show, Callahan. You don't get to play the hero." Wade tossed the pouch at his feet. "Count it." The room went quiet. Fletcher spat in the dirt, but he bent down and checked the pouch. Then he nodded to his men. "Cut her loose." One of them slashed the ropes around her wrists. The girl swayed but didn't fall. "Take the sack off," Wade said. Fletcher hesitated. "Ain't no need." "Do it." The man yanked the sack away. Wade staggered. His knees buckled. He caught himself on the edge of the crate. He knew that face. It couldn't be, but it was Lena. Lena Halvorsen. The girl who'd saved his life on the border 4 winters ago. Daughter of a Norwegian trapper. She'd nursed him back from a bullet wound, shared her fire, given him a name to dream about when the cold got bad. He thought she died when the cabin burned. He'd seen the smoke. Searched for days. But there she was. Eyes empty. Cheeks hollow. She didn't seem to recognize him. Wade stepped forward, gently took her hand. "It's me. It's Wade." Nothing. Not even a blink. Fletcher laughed. "She's been like that since we found her. Pretty thing, ain't she? But the lights are off." Wade turned slowly. His voice was low. "Where did you get her?" "Trapper brought her in. Said she was feral. Half dead. Figured I'd give her a better home." He grinned. "You bought her fair." Wade didn't speak. He helped Lena down from the crate. She leaned on him without looking up. As they turned to go, Fletcher called out, "You can't save her, you know. Some folks don't want saving." Wade didn't look back. He rode slow, one arm around Lena, keeping her steady in the saddle. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just stared into the dark, like her soul was somewhere he couldn't reach. And Wade knew, deep in his bones, that buying her hadn't fixed anything. It had only begun to uncover what really broke. The town of Morrow Creek liked to pretend it was honest, but it had too many secrets buried in the dust. In the weeks after Wade brought Lena home, folks looked at him sideways. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew what kind of auction Fletcher had been running. Most assumed Wade had bought himself a plaything. A few even offered to buy her off him for double what he paid. Wade ignored them all. He didn't owe them an explanation. What he had now wasn't something he could explain. Lena hadn't spoken since that night. She slept with her back to the wall and flinched when doors opened too fast. Wade tried to be patient. He didn't touch her, gave her space. He set up a bed for her in the loft, left food by the hearth, and made sure she had clean clothes. Some mornings she'd sit outside with Rufus, eyes locked on the hills like she was waiting for something. Or someone. Wade didn't know if she remembered him or not. Sometimes he'd catch her staring at him, like she was trying to place him, like a face seen in a half-forgotten dream. But the look never stayed, and she never said his name. Then came the day Marshal Quinn rode into town. He came out of nowhere, wearing a badge that looked too new and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Said he'd been sent from Carson City to clean up Morrow Creek. Said it with a kind of cold charm that set people on edge. But he had papers, authority, and he carried himself like a man who'd already killed more people than he cared to count. Fletcher didn't seem to know what to make of him. For the first time in years, he kept a low profile. Wade didn't trust the marshal, not because he said the right things, but because he said them too well. Folks like him didn't show up unless they were hunting something or someone. One afternoon, the marshal stopped by Wade's ranch, said he was getting to know the community. He eyed Lena with a touch too much interest, but kept his tone smooth. "She yours?" he asked. "She's under my roof," Wade said. Quinn raised an eyebrow. "That's a strange way to put it." "It's the truth." Quinn let it hang for a moment. Then he tipped his hat and left. But Wade knew better than to relax. 2 days later, Clara Hensley came knocking. Clara ran the mercantile and had done so since her husband died in a wagon accident 3 winters back. She was smart, sharp-tongued, and known for being fair with prices but fierce with gossip. She also happened to be one of the few people Wade respected. Not because she was kind, though she could be, but because she never lied. She had a way of seeing straight through people. Clara brought bread and a satchel of fresh linens. "For the girl," she said, handing them over without comment. Then she stepped inside and looked around. "She doesn't talk?" she asked. Wade shook his head. "Not yet." Clara sat by the fire, watching Lena with a strange softness in her eyes. "She's scared. Not dumb. Probably been traded 3-4 times by now." Wade's jaw tightened. "You heard that from Fletcher?" "I heard it from her eyes," Clara said. "Men like him don't get girls like that firsthand." They come through hands. Bad ones. Wade didn't answer. He didn't want to know what had happened to Lena between the night of the fire and that auction block. He already saw it in her shoulders, in how she flinched at laughter, and how she sat like her body didn't belong to her anymore. "Listen," Clara said, her voice lowering. "There's talk around town. That marshal's asking too many questions. About you. About her. About what you saw at the auction. I didn't see anything worth talking about. That's not how he sees it. He's sniffing around Fletcher's operation like a man with a personal stake. Like he's not just doing his job. Maybe he isn't." Clara looked him in the eye. "You ever wonder why a federal badge shows up now? After years of Fletcher running that show unchecked." Wade nodded slowly. "Yeah, I wondered." That night, Wade saddled up and rode out to the edge of town. There was a man he needed to talk to, Elias Finch, an old Army scout who'd gone half-blind but still saw more than most. Lived in a shack behind the hills, kept a bottle of whiskey hidden under every floorboard. He'd once helped Wade track down a rustler's trail, and though he talked more to himself than other people, his instincts were sharp. Elias opened the door before Wade knocked. "Marshal's not what he says," he rasped before Wade could speak. "Saw him back in Wichita. Different name. Different uniform. What was he then? Pinkerton. Maybe. Or worse. Worked private. Rich folks. Heard he got paid to clean up a brothel fire. Nobody walked out but him." Wade rubbed his jaw. "So what's he here for?" Elias squinted at him. "Don't know. But he ain't hunting justice." Back at the ranch, Lena had started to change. Slowly. She didn't talk, but she began humming low, tuneless sounds that filled the silence like a heartbeat. She cooked eggs one morning, brushed Rufus's fur the next. When Wade offered her the reins to the wagon one day, she didn't flinch, just nodded and took them. But something else changed too. One night, Wade caught her standing by his rifle, not touching it, just staring. Another evening, he woke up and found her outside, barefoot in the cold, whispering something in Norwegian. Her eyes were wide, not afraid, focused, like she was remembering something. And then there was the drawing. He found it tucked between pages of his old Bible, something he hadn't touched in years. A rough sketch on scrap paper. It showed a man's face. Sharp jaw, deep-set eyes, and behind him, smoke, fire, death. Wade recognized the face. It was Marshal Quinn. He didn't ask her about it. Not yet. Instead, he rode into town and found Clara. They sat behind a mercantile, away from eyes and ears. "She remembers something," he said. Clara nodded. "I figured. And you're thinking the marshal's part of it." "I think she saw him. I think he was there when her cabin burned." Clara looked away, thinking, then she's not just some girl caught in a trade. She's a witness. Wade looked down at his hands, and I brought her right back into the open. They were quiet a long time. Then Clara stood. "There's something else." "What?" "McKee, the banker. He's been writing letters, sending money east. Big sums, under different names. I asked a friend in Prescott to look into it. You want to guess who one of those letters was addressed to?" "Marshal Quinn." Clara nodded. So it was all tangled together. Fletcher, McKee, the marshal, and now Lena, with a fire behind her eyes that hadn't been there before. Wade rode home slow that night, watching the stars. The wind had changed. Something was coming. He could feel it, and he had a sick feeling that the girl he'd tried to save was the only reason he'd be forced to pick up a gun again. He didn't mind the fight. He'd seen worse. What scared him was the way Lena looked at that rifle, like she already knew how to use it. Spring turned the valley green again, but Wade couldn't shake the sense that something was closing in. The days stretched long and warm. The soil softened underfoot, and birds sang louder in the mornings. But under it all, a current of tension hummed, low and steady. Life on the ranch carried on. Lena had taken to working beside him without needing to be asked. She fixed broken fence posts, carried buckets to the well, milked the goat that Clara had quietly dropped off one morning, like some silent truce offering between women. But it was the quiet moments between chores were the most changed. One morning, Wade found her sitting by the creek near the property line, rubbing a piece of flint between her fingers. He sat beside her without speaking. After a minute, she held out the stone to him. It was shaped into a crude knife edge. "I used to carry one," she said softly. Her voice was rusty, like it hadn't been used in a long while. Wade didn't show surprise, just took the flint and turned it in his hands. "Still do." She looked at him, eyes clear. "Not yet." That small exchange meant more than anything else so far. Wade didn't push her for more. He just passed the flint back and sat with her until the sun dipped low. She started speaking more after that. Short phrases, a few words here and there, always with care, like she was testing whether the world would punish her for using her voice. Wade never corrected her broken English. He let her find her pace. Some nights, she asked about the horses, about the stars, about the scar on his ribs. And little by little, she began to smile. Not often, but when she did, it lit her whole face. One day, while planting seeds in the vegetable garden, she asked, "Why you not look away at auction?" Wade paused, the dirt heavy in his hands. "Because I knew your face. You remembered me? I never forgot." She nodded once, then pressed her hands into the soil again, like the answer had settled something inside her. They shared more than silence after that. One night, a storm rolled through the hills. Thunder cracked the sky open, and Lena woke screaming, fists clenched, breath sharp as knives. Wade rushed up to the loft and found her curled in the corner, eyes wild, fighting something only she could see. "It's not now," he said gently, crouching beside her. "You're here. You're safe." She wouldn't let him touch her, but she listened. Listened as he sat beside her and told her about the war. About men screaming in the dark and fires eating up everything they loved. He didn't tell her to forget. Just let her know she wasn't the only one who carried ghosts. When she finally let him cover her with a quilt, she whispered, "He locked me in. He watched it burn." "Who?" Wade asked, though he already knew. "The man with the badge. Quinn." That night, Wade didn't sleep. He sat on the porch with his rifle and watched the tree line. He knew it was only a matter of time before the marshal made his move. But in the days that followed, the quiet returned. For a while, Clara came by more often, usually under the pretense of bringing flour or checking on the garden. She took a liking to Lena, speaking to her as if she were a daughter, though she never admitted as much. One afternoon, while the two of them baked bread in the kitchen, Wade caught Clara watching Lena with a strange expression, somewhere between sorrow and guilt. "You knew her family?" he asked later, as Clara saddled her mule. "I knew of them," she said, not meeting his eye. Her mother was quiet, strange in that Scandinavian way, but kind. Her father, he made enemies, drank too much, sold pelts for whiskey instead of flour. Folks stopped trading with him. Rumor was he crossed someone important, someone like Fletcher, or someone who paid Fletcher, she said. Then, more softly, she was just a girl, and nobody fought for her when the cabin burned. "I should have tried harder to find her." Clara looked at him with a tired smile. "You're trying now." Later that week, Wade took Lena to the high pasture to check on a few steers that hadn't come down in the spring drive. It was her first time riding alone since she came to the ranch. She was nervous, stiff in the saddle, but she didn't ask for help. Wade kept his distance, letting her prove it to herself. When they reached the ridge, they dismounted. The cattle were there, lazy and chewing. But Lena didn't look at them. She looked out at the mountains, at the distant smoke trails that marked other ranches, other lives. "I want to know what he did," she said suddenly. "I want to remember everything." Wade didn't answer right away. "You sure?" She turned to him. "I was a person. Then I was a thing. I want to know what was taken." That night, she sat by the fire with a piece of charcoal and a strip of linen. She drew symbols, faces, fragments. Slowly, a picture began to form. A burned cabin, a man with a silver badge and blood on his boots. Another man, maybe Fletcher, holding her back as the flames swallowed everything. Wade watched her, heart heavy. She was digging through the wreckage of her soul with bare hands. The next morning, Marshal Quinn returned. He didn't come alone. McKee was with him, dressed like a banker should be, calm and smug. They came under the guise of checking on property rights. Wade knew it was a bluff. "You've got something that belongs to someone else," McKee said, hands folded behind his back. "She's not property," Wade replied, voice like steel. Quinn smiled. "That's where you're wrong. See, she's evidence. And harboring evidence makes you an obstruction." "She's not a witness," Wade said. "Not yet. Not until she remembers." Quinn stepped forward. "Then maybe it's time we help her remember." Lena stood behind Wade, eyes hard. She held the flint knife in her hand. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make a point. "You come back here," Wade said, "and I won't be talking next time." They left, but not before Quinn tipped his hat and said, "You've made this personal, Callahan." "That's a mistake." For days after, Wade watched the roads. Every sound in the trees, put his hand on his gun. He moved Lena's sleeping spot to the root cellar, rigged a bell to the barn door, and stashed a revolver under the porch steps. He'd fought in war. He knew the feeling before an ambush. Lena, for her part, didn't shrink. She sharpened her knife, asked Wade to show her how to load the rifle. She practiced with bottles and pine cones, learned to brace her shoulder, control her breath. She wasn't a child anymore. She was preparing for something. One night, as rain whispered against the windows, she sat beside him and said, "I used to think dying in that fire would have been better." Wade turned to her slowly. "And now I want to live. I want him to see me live." He nodded. "Then we'll make sure he does." It was a quiet vow, but they both felt it. Clara brought word the next day. Fletcher was selling again. Another secret auction. Same place. Same setup. Rumors said it was a cover. That Quinn would be there, and not for trade. "He's looking for her," Clara said. "He's going to try and take her back into the system. Say she's sick or unstable." Wade clenched his fists. "He wants to erase her." "Then you need to beat him to it," Clara said. "Tell your truth before he buries it." That night, Lena handed Wade the drawing she'd finished. It was Quinn's face, surrounded by smoke and shadows. But this time, her eyes had added something else, a second figure standing behind him. Fletcher and McKee. They weren't just part of the memory. They were part of the plan. "They planned the fire," she whispered. "They needed her gone." "Why?" Wade asked. Lena swallowed. "My father knew. About the girls. He tried to tell someone." Wade sat back, breath knocked out of him. "He tried to stop them." She nodded. "So they stopped him first." Wade looked at the drawing again, hands shaking. Everything made sense now. This wasn't just about a girl being bought and sold. This was about covering tracks. About silencing the one person left who could tie them to a string of crimes. And now, that girl had a voice again. They had to move fast. But before they made a plan, Wade looked at Lena and asked, "Are you ready to be seen? Really seen? Not as a victim, but as the one who stood back up?" She nodded. "I don't want revenge. I want to end it." And that, more than any weapon, was the most dangerous thing she could carry. The sun hadn't yet risen when Wade and Lena left the ranch. They traveled light, just one pack, one rifle, and the paper drawing Lena had made. Wade rode tall, his jaw set hard. Lena rode beside him, her shoulders squared, braid tight against her back. The plan was half mad, but it was the only way forward. They weren't just heading into danger. They were walking into the very place that had started it all. The cattle yards outside of Ridge Hollow, where the auction would be held again, masked as a livestock sale. Wade had written a letter the night before. He gave it to Clara to deliver if he didn't come back. Inside it was the truth, the names, the accusations, the drawing Lena had made, and the account of what she remembered. It was enough to blow a hole in the respectable faces of men like McKee and Quinn, if anyone was brave enough to act on it. But Wade didn't trust paper alone to carry this truth. He needed Lena to stand up in the flesh. Alive, unhidden. The road into town was too quiet, too still. Wade kept glancing over his shoulder. He could feel it in his gut. Something was coming. They reached Ridge Hollow just after noon. The makeshift pens were set up, livestock milling about. The same covered platform sat near the edge of the yard. where human flesh had been sold like cattle. There were no signs, no words spoken aloud, but everyone who mattered knew why they were there and who would be for sale. Wade and Lena didn't go to the crowd. They went to the church first. It was empty, save for a single man kneeling at the altar. Sheriff Branton. He rose when he heard them come in, hand resting near his holster. "I heard you're back," he said. "You're either a damn fool or the bravest man I know." "Depends how this ends," Wade said. Branton looked at Lena. His eyes softened. "You remember?" Lena stepped forward, slow but sure. "I remember being a girl. I remember fire. And I remember his face." She handed the sheriff her drawing. He studied it for a long time, said nothing. "Will you help us?" Wade asked. Branton sighed. "If you go in there, you might not come back out." "We're counting on that," Wade replied. "They won't be able to help themselves." The sheriff nodded. "Then I'll be in the back row, and I'll keep my gun close." As they walked out into the sun, Wade's hand found Lena's for just a moment. "You sure? No more hiding," she said. They walked straight into the auction yard. McKee was there, dressed like a preacher, smiling and shaking hands. Quinn stood just behind him, playing the part of lawman, tipping his hat at townsfolk. But when he saw Wade and Lena, his smile faltered. And when he saw Lena's face uncovered, his hand dropped to his hip. "Don't," Wade warned, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You draw that gun in front of these people, and everyone will see you for what you are." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lena stepped onto the platform. Alone, she turned slowly to face the gathering. Her voice shook as she began, but it grew with each word. She told them what she remembered. About the night her home burned. About the man who stood in the doorway and watched. About Fletcher. About Quinn. About the girls who never came back from their work placements. About the lie. McKee laughed. "You expect these people to believe the ramblings of a traumatized half-breed girl." Someone in the crowd shouted. "Then why she got the same story as the one from last year?" Another voice. "And the redhead who went missing from Elk Creek?" Branton stepped forward, hand on his gun. "You shut your damn mouth, McKee. I got 3 depositions, all naming you." The crowd erupted. Voices rose. Quinn reached for his gun, but Wade had already drawn. "Don't," he said again. "This ends now." But Quinn wasn't looking at Wade anymore. He was looking at Lena. "You should have died in that fire," he hissed. And then he lunged. The shot cracked the air. Lena stood her ground, smoke curling from the barrel of the rifle in her hands. Quinn dropped to his knees, clutching his side, blood soaking his shirt. McKee turned to run, but the sheriff and 2 ranchers tackled him before he could reach the horse post. Silence fell, then murmurs, then cheers. But Lena didn't hear any of it. She stood frozen, the rifle slipping from her hands. Wade rushed to her, caught her before her knees gave out. "You did it," he whispered. "You ended it." She looked at him, wide-eyed. "I was scared." "I was too," he said. The aftermath was chaos. Quinn lived, but barely. McKee was hauled off by U.S. Marshal 3 days later after Branton wired in every report and signed affidavit he could gather. Fletcher? He disappeared before they could serve a warrant. Word had it he crossed into Mexico. Back at the ranch, peace didn't come quickly. Lena stopped talking for a while. Just sat on the porch, watching the trees. Wade didn't push. He let her sit. He worked the ranch alone for days. Waited. Then, one morning, he found her in the barn, mucking the stalls. "Could have let me do that," he said. She looked up, hair in her eyes. "I needed to feel useful again. You always were." That night, she told him about her mother's lullabies. About the stories her father told by firelight. About how she used to climb trees barefoot just to be above the smoke. About how, for years, she dreamed she was still burning. But now, she said, "I just see sky." They sat on the porch, watching the last light fade. Wade reached for her hand, and this time, she didn't pull away. "Do you still want to leave?" he asked. She looked at him. "No, I want to build something. Like a future." She nodded. There would still be hard days. Fear didn't leave just because the danger did. But they had survived. Not just the gunfire or the flames, but the silence, the shame, the lies. Now all that was left was to live, and neither of them would do it alone. The high country turned golden as summer neared its end. The grass bent heavy with seed, and the hills shimmered in the heat. Life on the ranch returned to its rhythm. Morning feedings, fence mending, and slow rides through the pasture. But Lena felt the shift before it showed itself in the land. It was inside her, something unsettled, unfinished. The truth had been spoken, yes. Men had been exposed. Quinn had been tried and found guilty of conspiracy and abuse of authority. McKee lost everything and would live out the rest of his years behind bars. But justice didn't bring peace. Not all at once. Lena still woke, gasping some nights, clawing at her chest like she couldn't breathe. Some mornings, she walked the property before the sun touched the hills, chasing a feeling she couldn't name. Wade never asked where she went. He just had coffee waiting when she came back. And that quiet steadiness was the only thing that kept her grounded some days. But the time for silence had passed. One morning, after feeding the hens, Lena found Wade in the paddock. He was brushing down the bay mare, humming an old tune. "I want to go back," she said. Wade stopped. "To where?" "To the cabin. My father's cabin." He turned slowly, eyes searching hers. "Are you sure? I have to see it again. As it is. Not as I remember." He nodded. "Then I'll ride with you." They left that same day, packed light. Just enough for one night, 2 bedrolls, and a flask of water each. The cabin was 3 ridges east, hidden in the fold of a hill where the forest grew thick. Wade hadn't been back there in over a decade. Not since the fire. The trail was overgrown, wild with sage and grass, but Lena knew it by heart. Her body remembered, even if her mind had buried it. As they rode, the world grew quiet. Not dead quiet, just still like it was waiting. When they reached the clearing, Lena stopped. The cabin was still there, or what was left of it. Half the walls had collapsed. The roof was a skeleton of charred beams. Blackened logs lay in a loose pile where the hearth used to be. Trees had grown in since then. Wildflowers, too. Life pushing up through what was ruined. Lena dismounted and walked forward slowly, her boots silent in the soft moss. She knelt near the hearth, where stones still held their place, though everything above them was gone. "This was my mother's corner," she whispered. "She used to sit here and shell peas." Wade stood back, watching her, giving her space. She told stories. I can't remember them all, but I remember her voice. Calm, even when we had no food. Even when my father came back with blood on his shirt and lies in his mouth. She stood and turned to the collapsed doorway. He used to stand there, watching the road. He said he had enemies. I didn't know what that meant until I saw Quinn ride up that night. I heard them yelling. I saw the silver badge. I smelled the smoke. Her breath caught. He locked the door from the outside. Wade stepped forward, but she raised her hand. She wasn't done. I screamed for him, for my father, for my mother, but the flames took them before they could answer. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't fall. She walked through the space, each step pressing down old ghosts. When I ran out the back window, I didn't look back. I thought maybe I'd go mad if I did. I kept running. For days. I found a river. A trader. Then Fletcher. She shuddered. Wade moved beside her now, silent as a shadow. He said he'd take me to safety, but he didn't. He sold me to McKee. She clenched her fists. They cut my hair, put a sack over my head, told me I was lucky, that I'd been chosen. Her voice cracked. Chosen for what? To be silent? To be passed around like a broken tool. Wade reached for her, and this time she let him hold her. She wept into his chest. Not like a girl, but like a woman who had carried too much, too long. When her breath finally slowed, she looked up at him. I hated you, she said softly, for not coming back, for forgetting me. Wade nodded, tears in his own eyes. I didn't forget. I just didn't know how to find you. And when I did, it was too late. No, she said. It wasn't. You looked at me. No one else did. You looked. They sat together in the ruins as the sun slid west. She told him more. About the first night in the brothel. The way the madam called her. About the girl who shared her bed and slit her wrists with a broken bottle. I stopped talking after that, she said. They couldn't take what I didn't give. You gave me something, Wade said. You gave me a reason to stay alive. She looked at him with something unreadable in her eyes. Then she leaned forward and kissed him. Not out of thanks, not out of sorrow, but because it was time. That night, they made camp under the stars, not far from the wreck of her childhood. The wind was soft, the fire low. They lay side by side on the bedrolls, saying little, until Lena asked, "What now?" "We go home," Wade said. "And after that, we build something," he said. "Something that can't be burned." She nodded. The next morning, she scattered wildflower seeds in the ashes of the hearth. "For them," she said. On the ride back, the world felt different. Not safer, maybe, but lighter, as if something had been lifted. Clara met them at the gate with her usual fuss, but she saw it too. The change in Lena's face, the set of her shoulders, the calm in her voice. She didn't ask questions, just handed Lena a new dress she'd sewn herself. "I thought maybe you'd want to choose how you look now," Clara said. Lena took the dress, and for the first time in years, she smiled without fear. The weeks that followed were quiet, but not idle. Wade and Lena worked together every day, repaired the barn roof, built a new chicken coop, planted rows of beans and squash. Each task was a brick laid in something solid and real. At night, they sat on the porch, sometimes holding hands, sometimes just being near. Lena spoke more often now, stories from her past, dreams for the future. Wade told her about his time in the war, about the brother he lost, the fear that had followed him home and never let go. Until one evening, Lena held up a piece of leather she'd been stitching. A baby moccasin. Wade stared at it, stunned. "I want to try," she said, "to make life." He took her hand. "Then we will." The final piece of the past came unexpectedly. A letter, delivered by stagecoach. From Fletcher. Wade opened it with shaking hands. Inside, only a few words. "You were right. I was a coward. She deserved better. I hope you give it to her. I won't return. Tell her I'm sorry." Lena read it, then tossed it in the fire. "He doesn't get a place in our story." And that was that. By fall, the ranch looked new. Fresh paint, strong fences. A nursery started in the west room. And Lena, standing tall in a blue dress, her hair long again, laughing as she raced a colt across the paddock. The trauma would always be there. So would the scars. But they didn't define her anymore. She had looked her past in the face. And lived. Not just survived, but lived. And Wade, the man who had once ridden away from everything, now stood still, rooted, loving her with a kind of quiet that held the world together. Together, they'd made it through the fire. And now, they were finally home. Winter rolled in softly that year. No early blizzards, no biting winds. Just a slow hush settling over the land, like the world was taking a deep breath. Snow dusted the tops of the hills and lay thin across the pasture. The air smelled of wood smoke and pine, and everything felt quieter, gentler. Even the animals seemed to move slower, like they knew the worst had passed. Inside the cabin, Lena hung dried sage and bundles of lavender over the hearth. Clara said it was for the air, to ward off sickness, but Lena said it was also for memory. Smells, like stories, carried things with them. Pain, yes, but also peace. In her own way, she was teaching herself to rewrite the memories. Not erase them, to soften their edges. Wade had started building the cradle in early November. He didn't tell anyone at first. Just worked late in the barn with a lantern swinging above him and a pencil behind his ear. He sanded each slat of wood until it was smooth as water-worn stone. He carved stars into the rail, quiet little symbols, like hope hidden in plain sight. When he gave it to Lena, he didn't say much. Just stood there, awkward and a little flushed, watching her trace the carvings with her fingers. "You made this?" she asked. He nodded. For her. They hadn't spoken the name aloud yet. Not because they were afraid, but because it didn't feel finished. As if their child would name herself when she was ready to be born. Lena reached for Wade's hand. "It's perfect," Life on the ranch found its rhythm again. Clara cooked, Wade worked the fields and helped the neighbors with their winter prep, and Lena stitched, sketched, and read old books from the town library. Some days, she still wandered into the trees alone, but when she returned, her face was calm. The weight in her shoulders had eased. The past wasn't gone, but it no longer ruled her. One day, a girl showed up at their door. She couldn't have been more than 17, with dark hair hacked short and bruises yellowing under her eyes. She didn't say her name, just asked, "Is it true?" about the girl with the sack on her head, the one who got away. Lena let her inside, gave her warm stew, let her sit near the fire without questions. Later, as Wade chopped wood out back, Lena came to him, voice quiet. "We have to make room." He looked at her, confused. "For the girls who come," she said. "There'll be more. You know there will." So they cleared out the old shed and began turning it into a bunkhouse. Clara brought extra quilts. The sheriff sent word to 2 other women in nearby counties who had once gone missing and come back changed. One had become a nurse. Another worked with horses. Together, they turned the ranch into something new. A place of healing. Not loud, not perfect, but real. One afternoon, Wade found Lena kneeling in the garden, fingers sunk into the frozen soil. "What are you doing?" he asked, smiling. "Garlic," she said. "It has to go in before the ground freezes. It sleeps all winter, then comes up strong in spring." He crouched beside her. "You really believe it?" "I do," she said. "Things grow even after fire." Wade kissed her right there in the dirt. Spring came late, but it came all the same. With it, their daughter. She was born in the early hours of April, as rain tapped soft against the roof. Lena labored long, but she didn't cry out. Clara held her hand, and Wade stayed near, pale but steady. When the baby came, silent for a terrifying moment, then howling like she'd swallowed thunder, Lena laughed. They named her Maya, a name that meant illusion in one language and love in another. A name that carried weight but also wonder. Lena held Maya close, her skin against her daughter's, her eyes searching the newborn face. "She's real," she whispered. "She's ours." Wade couldn't speak, just knelt at the bedside and cried. The seasons turned again. Maya grew strong and loud. She liked the feel of grass, hated the feel of shoes. She smiled like her mother and stared like her father. The women who came to the ranch helped raise her, each one giving a piece of themselves, as if passing on strength the way others once passed down heirlooms. The bunkhouse filled with stories. Some whispered in the night, some shouted into the wind. But all of them were believed. No one questioned pain here. No one flinched at truth. Lena painted again. Not from memory this time, but from now. She painted Maya asleep in the hayloft. Wade riding across a sunlit field. Clara blowing flour from her nose. Girls braiding each other's hair on the porch. One canvas she saved for last. It showed her old cabin, now overgrown but not forgotten. And in the foreground, a small girl standing barefoot among wildflowers. Behind her, barely visible, were the faces of her mother and father, not perfect, not whole, but present. Watching, not judging. She titled it Ashes to Earth. The townsfolk, once hesitant, came around in time. They brought pies, supplies, and sometimes even apologies. The sheriff retired, but not before making sure the new one knew the names of the guilty and the saved. Quinn died in prison. McKee didn't live long either. But the story didn't end with them. It ended here, with a quiet ranch at the edge of the wild, where girls found their feet again and men like Wade learned to listen, to stay, to rebuild. On the first anniversary of Maya's birth, Lena gathered everyone beneath the big elm tree. They planted a second tree beside it, a sapling she'd grown herself from seed. "It'll take years," someone said. Lena smiled. So did I. They tied ribbons to its branches, each with a word. Freedom, truth, love, begin. Wade slipped one more ribbon into her hand. She unfolded it. Home. The wind stirred. The leaves rustled. Maya giggled and tried to eat one of the ribbons. Lena laughed, pulled her daughter close, and looked out over the land. This was no fairy tale. The world was still cruel sometimes. Not every girl was saved. Not every monster paid. But this place, this life, they made it out of ash and bone, blood and memory. It was real, and that made all the difference. The past would always echo, but now so would laughter, so would love, and that was enough.